Welcome back. I'm here again with David Flin. Today, we're going to talk about his two tours in Northern Ireland during the Troubles period, the first in 1973 and the second in 1977. Welcome back, David. It's good to see you again.
Yes, thank you.
So let's start with your tour in 1973. What was your rank, your role within the Royal Marines, and how did it start, and kind of get to how did it end?
Right, 73, I was a corporal, I went in as a corporal and I came out as a sergeant for there. Now, during the Troubles started in 69, when British troops were sent in because of basically disturbances and to try and keep the warring factions apart. In 71, there was Bloody Sunday, the Paras, which caused a whole deal of unrest. The paratroopers were exactly the wrong unit to be sent to deal with peacekeeping, because their whole training is to deal with a problem quickly.
With overwhelming force.
But using brute force and ignorance, that for the situations that they're trained for, that's fine. But this wasn't the situation. A complete mess was made of Bloody Sunday, and as a consequence, feelings were now running very high in Ireland. You have the nationalist and the loyalist camps, both of whom were not listening to each other, decided the way to solve their problems was by force, by car bombs, by bombs in places, by random shootings, by standard gangland type tactics. They were effectively crime bosses writ large there. Because of Bloody Sunday, we had very, very tight rules of engagement. We were only allowed to fire under very, very specific circumstances, something that people who haven't been in the military don't often realise. But you are given rules of engagement, which is when you can shoot and when can't you shoot. In this case, we could only shoot if we had come under direct, effective fire. Basically, we could only fire if we'd taken casualties. Otherwise, we were to hold fire. If people were shooting over our heads, shooting back would just inflame the situation.
So, in other words, somebody, one of your soldiers or one of your Marines had to be physically, not only just had to be shot at, but had to be hit in order for you to respond.
Yes,
okay. Which is insane.
It's insane. If they were missed, it would be later claimed that it was just random bullets going overhead. We also had to have a clear identified target. We couldn't just shoot back at someone we thought might be a problem. We had to be certain that it was a target, and that target couldn't be backstopped by anything. So that from the viewpoint of nigh on 50 years on, I can see why those rules were in place. We weren't necessarily entirely happy with the rules, because effectively it meant that we could only do anything if we had taken casualties. To be honest, in my first 6-month tour of Belfast, no one ever shot at us, either my troop or any of the others that we were with there, mainly because no one wants to shoot at people who are much heavier armed than they are.
Right.
And both the various Republican factions, the IRA plus all the other assorted letters, and all the loyalist factions, the UDL, Third Force, and the like, they were more keen on fighting each other and imposing their will on the community that they were in than they were on fighting us. We just got in the way. So that was the backdrop to it. We would do patrols to go out to reassure the public. If they were strongly Republican, they hated us because, we were the British Army, etc. If they were loyalists, they hated us because we were stopping them from dealing with the Republican menace, etc. So we were hated on all sides. So, that's the lot of a peacekeeper.
That's like the U.S. in Asia.
Yeah.
That's how we keep the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese from killing each other. They hate us. They hate us less than they hate everybody else.
Yeah, the troubles themselves were. I still don't really understand. 90% of the population of Northern Ireland just wanted to be left alone to live their lives, but you had all sorts of. You had Republican streets, you had loyalist streets. There was the whole Romeo and Juliet nonsense that seeing someone from one of the other communities, strict no-no. I'm sure there's a Romeo and Juliet story to be had from there. You also had some fairly unpleasant incidents. Effectively, civilians were considered collateral damage if they could damage someone from the other side. So placing a bomb in a car near a school, this was not a problem for them. It was just such a wholly unpleasant way of thinking. I mean, my whole training, what you do with other military is one thing, but civilians, they're just trying to live a life. They're not part of this, but they were very much a part of it. It basically got so bad that in 1976, I wasn't around there, but Northern Ireland at the time, but the peace marches started, and basically people that there was a flashpoint. People realised they'd had enough, and they had an awful lot of peace marchers. Mary Corrigan and Williams, another name has gone out of my head, started a movement saying we have had enough, and they did marches for peace. They ended up getting a Nobel Peace Prize for it. It certainly, it didn't calm things down, but it made both sides of the maniacs more careful about upsetting the civilian population. So after 76, things became more targeted. Before that, it was a very Wild West, anything goes type situation.
Now, when you were there in 73, what sorts of operations did you engage in?
Largely responses. If there was a gathering, we would go there to basically to separate the gathering, to persuade the crowd that somewhere else was a good place to be, or what have you. Or if there'd been an incident, if a bomb had gone off, we would be sent to the area to clear up, basically.
So remove bits and pieces of humanity, basically, in some cases.
Bits and pieces, yes. There was one incident which still get nightmares over from time to time. One of the loyalist organisations had worked out that the vast majority of Republicans were Catholics who tended to have more children than the Protestants. And so, therefore, planting a bomb in a mother care shop would hit Catholics rather than Protestants. And so, clearing up after a bomb had gone off in a mother care shop, yeah, that's not fun.
Now, for an American audience, a mother care shop, what is that? like baby clothes? What do they sell?
Sells baby clothes, toys for baby. It is basically a shop for young mothers to buy things for babies and very young children.
So someone on the orange side placed a bomb in a mother care shop. Were there babies that like mothers would take with them when they went?
Well, yeah, it's a shop where mothers would take babies into. Yeah.
And someone planted a bomb and it went off in a shop
and it
with
went off.
People in it. And you had to clear the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, hence I tend to have fairly strong views about the maniacs who do such things. It's just the word evil is just too weak.
Did they ever find out who personally was responsible for that? Not the side, but the person?
Yes, they did.
Interesting. Who were you involved in finding that person at all, or?
Yes, I was. He got taken into custody for there and was sent to a prison on the mainland on the basis that being in a prison in Ulster would have been inflammatory.
Yeah.
So yes, he did end up. I believe his problem. I don't know how long he got served, but he got taken into custody. We found out that it was convicted and went to a mainland prison.
And presumably he's either still there or he's no longer living.
I have no idea what happened to him there after that, but the letter of justice was done. Whether it was justice in the fuller sense of the word is another matter. But
so sorry to be ignorant, but at the time, did Britain have capital punishment?
No, we didn't. Only for very specific crimes: piracy, arson in Her Majesty's dockyards, treason were the main ones. But murder, we didn't have capital punishment at the time. We'd got rid of that in the 1960s.
Sorry to pry on this, and we don't have to talk about it because it could be pretty raw. Like, how many people were killed in that, include like women, children, etc.?
There was one fatality and one injured. The fatality was a messy one, but there was only the one death. Unfortunately, it was a 3-year-old child, which, as I say, evil is too weak a word.
And the injury was the mother?
The mother was injured. The child was killed.
Wow. Okay, so how did you find the perpetrator?
Basically, the traditional method of someone grassed him up. A confidential informant from the orange side, the loyalists, basically reckoned, no, this was a step too far, and told the authorities, if you want to know who did it, this is the person you need to speak to. It had gone too far, even for the majority of I think it was the UDL, but I lose track of all the alphabet soups that were over there. But yes, his own people grassed him up.
Now, how did the IRA respond?
They weren't happy. They planted a bomb, and in a known loyalist pub. Once the guy had been caught, they called off their bombing campaign in revenge for that and just went back to their normal bombing campaigns.
But they still planted a bomb in a pub that went off, I'm assuming.
No, it didn't go off. It was found before it went off. They'd said that they would bomb pubs in revenge, but this one didn't go off, and then the chap had been caught, and so they went back to their normal way of doing things.
And what was their normal way of doing things?
Oh, in order to keep their own people in line or to keep things in line, you had kneecappings, six-packs, drills, which are terms. Kneecapping, you shoot someone in the kneecap, that's a typical punishment. for there. There was a good chance that they'd never be able to walk properly again. It depends on precise things. The six-pack is 2 knees, 2 elbows, 2 wrists, kneecapping those 6. That's for very serious offence. And drilling is doing the same as that, only using a power drill rather than there. The troubles weren't pleasant.
And they would do this to people who were out of, like, their own people out of line, or would they do this to
keeping their own people in line, keeping people from the other side who had wandered into their turf? That was largely punishment for not following orders. Rumour has it that one senior IRA commander gave a punishment to someone under their own command for the crime of sleeping with his wife, which was taking the political into the personal with a vengeance. But yeah, Belfast, no fun. People today will glorify or think kindly back on the times when the Troubles were some sort of expression of either bold freedom fighters going for a united Ireland or brave loyalists. It was maintaining links with the mother country. No, it was just plain nasty. And to a large extent, the people doing this, they became so fond of doing it, they were doing it for the sake of doing it rather than for any cause. The means became an end in itself. Thank God for the Good Friday Agreement and peace in 97. I mean, stuff still goes on, but it's nothing like as bad as it was.
And so when you left in 73 and came back in 77, how did it change, or how had it changed?
Right. Well, it changed very differently. In 77, I wasn't posted to Belfast. I was on the border. Basically, the idea was guns and equipment was coming in from the Republic to Northern Ireland. Effectively, arms caches would be stored in the Republic, and people would, so that they could go about their normal business in the north. And guns? What guns, officer? We ain't got no guns. They'd nip it when they needed stuff for an operation. They'd nip over to the Republic, pick it up, and come back. My job was firstly to catch them as they were coming to or fro, and the subtext was the easiest place to find them is where their arm caches were, which was in the Republic. So, to be honest, I spent most of my time there on the Republic side of the border, which, no, you're not allowed to do that completely there. What we would do is we'd locate an arms cache, we would report it to the Gardaí, the Irish police, say there is an arms cache at this location, can you please do something about it? 9 times out of 10, they would come along and deal with it. 1 time out of 10, the terrorists would get there and would move to another location beforehand. The Gardaí really didn't like the IRA either, simply because it made normal life difficult. The border crossings were always fraught places to live, and police generally don't like people who break the law. Strange that.
So you would give notice that you had intelligence, likely from like a confidential informant.
Yeah.
Unless you weren't using satellite intelligence for this stuff, I'm assuming.
Yeah, satellite intelligence would have been a bit science fictional for the time.
I figured.
But yes, it was we have reason to believe that if you go to this location, you will find something of interest in the arms nature, and they would act on it with whatever haste they could manage. They were, of course, heavily overworked because, like all police forces, everywhere, anywhere, anytime, they have more work to do than they had people to do the work. This was generally a higher priority, but sometimes they just had people already out. Sometimes it happened, usually it happened, sometimes it slipped through the cracks.
Okay, and then did you ever go there? You had to go across the border. You would go with the Irish police, or you would go separately? Would you go undercover? Would you go into uniform? That's a lot of questions I'm throwing at you.
Right. The way it was done, and I think it's fairly safe to say at this point, sort of 50 years after the event, we'd go in uniform across. I mean, we were Marines. We were trained to avoid being detected. I mean, it's part of the training. We have a whole course on evading detection in enemy territory. I mean, it's what we do. So yes, we would get lost across the border, look around for likely arms dump. Ideally, we would follow suspicious people there, locate and identify exactly where it was, go back to our side of the border, and then phone through to the nearest Garda office and say, by some psychic intuition, we think that there is something. Everybody knew what was happening. No one admitted that it was happening. Every so often, someone would get caught doing it, and then it would be slap wrists all round. You really shouldn't be doing this. This is technically invading another country.
It's funny that you mentioned, by psychic means, at the same time the U.S., the CIA started the remote viewing program, I think, was probably actively using it by 1976. The military started using it around kind of in the late 70s or so, I think. But it's funny you mentioned that. Like while you were saying, joking about it, the U.S. military was actually, as the CIA was actively acquiring intelligence through the remote viewing techniques that they claimed didn't work in 1976, but they did it for 20 years. Like, oh, well, that doesn't work. So, and they probably still do. They hire them as contractors. But anyway, not to digress. I've actually interviewed one of them on this show, Dr. David Morehouse. So the stuff works. It's just the public just will never believe it. Anyway, okay, so you were kind of doing some accidentally on purpose reconnaissance across the border and then you would go through the proper channels in order to get the Irish to seize it, and nine times out of 10 that they did.
Basically, we could have blown the arms caches up ourselves, but British troops blowing stuff up on Irish territory,
it's an act of war, right?
That might have been a little unwise. So yes, we would. In the perfect case, we would go across, we would locate things, we would go back, no one would know we'd been there, and we would phone through proper channels with the information.
Now, was that 100% of the intel that you got, or did you also sometimes get it through confidential informants and things like that?
Oh, we had confidential informers. I suppose it's technically accurate. It didn't sort of feel that, but yes, I mean you'd get chatting to people. They would say things. You'd make friends. But when you'd gain their trust, they would start telling you things. Well, Jim down the road, he's often taking things across the border. And I mean, sometimes it's simply villagers settling old scores with each other. They don't like things. I mean, the nature of the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border, it's incredibly porous. There are known crossing points, but by and large, you can wander across and it can be quite difficult to know. There are certainly fields that straddle the border. You can have a cow eating grass in the Republic in the morning, and in the afternoon it's wandered over into Northern Ireland and is there. And it's staying in the same field, but it just crosses the border because the field crosses the border. So,
I mean, are there instances where a farmer owns a field on both sides of the border?
oh yeah, quite a few. There's certainly one farmhouse I know that where part of it is on one side and part on the other side of the border. So
I don't mean to get into like extreme detail, but like, how do they pay taxes to? Like, who? Both sides?
Well, who they? I mean, they lived there. Basically, the border came after the farmhouse, so I think they end up being whoever they feel like being at the moment. I believe if they needed something, they belonged to the authority that happened to be talking to them at that time. And if it was paying taxes or anything like that, they pay them to the other side. Yeah, people around borderers can be terribly inventive in these sorts of things. But yes, but the border is, calling it a border is a very loose. It's certainly not like the Berlin Wall or anything serious. And of course, when there are tensions between Britain and Ireland, as there have been over Brexit and trade, the people in the borderland, on the border there, are in a difficult position simply because of the nature of the beast. How on earth are they going to deal with differences? It's all a bit of a nonsense, and I'm certainly not clever enough to know what the answer is. But back in the day, people just got on with things. Yeah.
Now, did you ever get close to getting cited during one of these operations?
Not that I'm aware of. I think there was probably a couple of cases of people very carefully turning blind eyes to it, either because they approved of what they're doing, or alternatively because they weren't going to shout out too loudly to a bunch of heavily armed people that I can see you. Tends not to be a wise thing to do.
And I assume you did this stuff almost exclusively at night.
Oh yeah, yes. No, the Marines tend to be very much night creatures of the night.
And at the time, were you still a sergeant, or did you become
sergeant at this time? Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. Any final wisdom or views on the experience? Is there anything you wish you would have done differently, or lessons that you took from it?
Anything I would have done differently? Yeah. I mean, certainly I came away with incredibly strong views about the treatment of civilians and what happens to civilians during times of conflict or disturbance. Basically, soldiers, Marines, people in the forces, this is their job. This is what they get paid to do. These are the risks that they've signed up for or have been conscripted for, if that's the way that the forces work. This is their job. If shit happens, well, tough. This is what you're paid to do. Civilians, they don't. They're just trying to live normal lives. If being a Marine, if being a soldier has any meaning, your job is to act as a shield for civilians. And when civilians get caught up in these things, that's just plain wrong. Falklands, which I've mentioned otherwise, in this respect was a very clean war. That the only people who were involved in the fighting were basically either servicemen on one side or the other, or civilians who had specifically chosen to go along, the merchant seamen on the merchant ships that were there. There weren't any innocent bystanders getting involved. I think there were 3 civilians who got killed when a bomb fell in the wrong place. From the point of view of the morality of warfare, it was a very clean war because civilians weren't involved. The Troubles, it was all about the civilians being involved, the paramilitaries deliberately targeting civilians. And, I certainly came away with the very strong view that that's wrong. If you're going to have wars, so be it, but civilian deaths is distressing.
All right, my friend. It was a pleasure talking about this. It's a difficult topic, right? But
yes.
It was great to hear that perspective and your perspective on the Troubles, as well as in the prior episode on the Falkland War. I look forward to talking with you in the next episode about the anthology that you put together. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much indeed.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.